Hello, welcome to episode 42 of Scuttlebutt, a Marine Corps Association podcast. Today and for the next few weeks, brought to you by Service Credit Union. Pretty excited to have them on board. I'm Nick. I'm here with Will.
Howdy.
He doesn't have a microphone on his head right now. Nancy.
Good morning.
John Bernstein.
Good morning.
And Sam Lichtman.
Morning, everyone.
And today we are going to be getting into some historical firearms with our guests who have recently written articles for, or written content for Leatherneck magazine relating to the M1 Garand, or Garen, as Sam will pronounce it.
Sure.
John, what are you up to these days?
Well, I'm the Arms and Armor Curator for NMMC, and have been here for about 2 years now. We've been actually pretty busy on a number of levels. Actually, right now I've been doing a lot of research into aircraft rockets because aviation ordnance also falls under my purview. But yeah, we've been reorganizing the arms room and sort of going through and identifying those pieces with historical provenance that we can really tell a good story with, and been trying to get the word out about those things through our Weapons Wednesday videos and also through Leatherneck and of course into the museum as well.
All right, and the museum's back up to full bore?
Yeah, we are
Right.
open, regular schedule now.
Awesome. And Sam, what are you up to?
I'm a full-time college student, and I work part-time at a gun store. Nothing really interesting other than that about me.
Interesting. No, not even. Full disclosure, Sam is Nancy's son, and he's up to. Nancy, what else is he up to?
Well, Sam grew up at Leatherneck.
Yeah, I've been tagging along in here since I was about 8 years old, and so I guess it's only fair that I should give something back and write articles. And I believe my fourth is just about to go to press.
Awesome. All right, and you both have recently contributed to Leatherneck, and for those of our listeners who aren't members or don't properly read Leatherneck, Nancy, can you tell us a little bit about
Yes,
your magazine?
Leatherneck, Magazine of the Marines, is a monthly publication of the Marine Corps Association. We cover the history, culture, traditions, and esprit de corps of the Marine Corps. And if you're not reading Leatherneck, I want to tell you right now, you should be.
All right, and you can get Leatherneck by becoming a member of the Marine Corps Association or subscribing to it through our app, which you can find on the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. We're going to take a quick break to thank our sponsor, and we'll be right back to start our discussion on the other side.
This episode of Scuttlebutt is sponsored by Service Credit Union. Our friends at Service Credit Union have been serving military, veterans, and their families for over 65 years. You might know that they provide mortgages, including VA loans as well as auto and personal loans. But did you know that they now have a loan specifically for the iBot mobility device? For those who don't know, the iBot is a revolutionary device that goes above and beyond what a traditional mobility device can do. It can go up curbs, navigate stairs and snow, and even rise up to 6 feet. Of course, this device also comes with a high cost that isn't usually covered by insurance. So Service Credit Union has stepped in to help provide its members with financing, with no money down and terms up to 72 months. For more details, visit servicecu.org/ibot.
All right, and happy 4th of July to everybody, and can't think of any better way to celebrate America than talking about some guns.
I got to agree with you there.
All right, we're going to start with articles that each of you have contributed to Leatherneck recently. I guess we'll start with you, Sam, because yours came out in April. This is my rifle in M1. What did you learn anything while you were writing that?
Yeah, just for a little bit of background, I have a series running in Leatherneck. Something of a series. There are only 2 installments so far called This Is My Rifle, and it's about the small arms used by the Marine Corps throughout history. And this past one was about the M1 Garand. Yes, I know people pronounce it Garand. We'll get into that later. About the history, the development. I go into sort of the engineering and how the rifle performed in service.
I love your article, by the way. So if you want to just dive into it a little bit, what in the part of the process of choosing the M1 Garand rifle? What were its predecessors beforehand when we started going from bolt action to semi-auto really informed the design of the M1 rifle?
So it replaced the M1903 Springfield in 1936 officially. The Army was the first service to adopt it. The Marine Corps held out for a little while longer. I know a lot of Marines out there will joke that everything they get is just cast off from the Army, which is sometimes true. And because the Marine Corps doesn't really have its own acquisitions program in the same way the Army does and the Navy. The Marine Corps held out for a little bit longer before adopting the M1. They were also looking at a rifle developed by Melvin Johnson, who was a Marine Corps reserve officer, and Marines actually carried those going into the Second World War. So Guadalcanal, the Marines did not have M1s when they invaded that island, but they adopted them pretty quickly thereafter. Marines in the fleet seemed to like them, and the Marine Corps used those until they were replaced by the M14 and then M16.
Cool. So why were they hesitant or slow to pick up the M1 Garand and ditch the M1903?
There's this theme you'll see throughout the history of U.S. military acquisitions. I'm sure you get this in other countries, but I'm not as familiar with those. Of the people in acquisitions being very conservative about new technology. They tend to be pretty hesitant to jump on board with this great new thing that promises to make soldiers and Marines so much more effective in combat because they worry about things like the changes to the logistics system to support a new weapon system or whatever. They worry about whether or not this unproven technology will actually work properly in field conditions, things like that. And in U.S. service, planners seem to be oddly concerned about soldiers and Marines wasting ammunition. This was an issue during the American Civil War. The U.S. Army refused to adopt any repeating rifle. They actually stonewalled as hard as they could to keep soldiers and Marines from getting repeating rifles because they thought that would make them waste ammunition. And same with moving from bolt-action Springfields to the semi-automatic Garen rifle. They were terrified that the ability to fire more rapidly would just mean people would be wasting ammunition, which didn't really end up being the case. Obviously, having more firepower is a good thing in how it multiplies the effectiveness of a unit of the same size.
Yeah, weren't the Marines too? I don't know if this is quite officially how they're doing it, but the way they was kind of spinning it publicly would be that they were talking about how the Marines are all basically sharpshooters anyway. They're all super accurate.
One of the concerns was that they were going to lose that focus on precision rifle marksmanship with a semi-automatic rifle, which, as Sam said, just was not the case at all. In fact, it made them much more precise because they could get a second round off right on target, that much faster. It was a myth, but it was the main reason for that delay in adoption.
Okay, and then so the Marines have picked up the rifle and the island chains. I'm just going to transition over to you, John.
Sure.
The Makin Atoll rifle that you're writing an article about.
So the Makin Raid was the first Marine Corps combat use of the M1. There was some combat use of it by the Army in the Philippines. There were a few of them that did see combat there and were used fairly effectively. But Makin, which was 10 days after the invasion of Guadalcanal, was the first Marine Corps use of it. And the way that Lieutenant Colonel Evans Carlson organized his unit was sort of unconventional, and their squads were made up of fire teams of an M1 man, a Thompson man, and a BAR man. 3-man fire team. Each squad had four 3-man fire teams and a squad leader. So really, a lot of firepower. And one of the things in the after-action reports that it talks about was the Japanese actually singled out the M1 men over the BAR gunners or the Thompson gunners because they were that much more dangerous. Precision rifle, aimed rifle fire, semi-automatically, really was a concern to the Japanese. So that really was a major issue that they ran into on Makin.
Was it because the Raiders were more, I guess, new for the Marine Corps at that time that they got the preeminent weapons compared to your average infantryman on Guadalcanal?
Sure, yeah. I mean, they were the special forces of the day. The MARSOC of the day. And so yeah, they did get sort of higher priority. And because the Raider battalions were pretty much hand built, they were able to identify weapon systems that they wanted that were sort of outside of the standard chain.
And you said the Japanese reported on this effectiveness. Was that known to the Marines afterward? Was it captured information, or was it revealed after the war?
No. This was the Marine Corps after action report citing, just going over what they encountered, and the Japanese snipers would focus on the M1 riflemen rather than the BAR gunners or the Thompson guys.
But the actual rifle that your article is about,
Yep.
it was recovered many, many years after the battle, right?
So there were 19 Marines. Actually, there were 30 Marines that didn't make it back, but 19 of them were buried on the island. Of those, those 19 were left on the island because there were a lot of struggles getting off the island. The rest of the battalions and everything, and they just were not able to bring their dead with them. So the natives on the island dug a mass grave and buried the Marines with their equipment and everything. The Army actually retook the island about 16 months later. So there was some question, could this be a leftover Army rifle? Nope, not at all. This was found with the remains of those 19 Marines, and there were definite indications, including dog tags and things like that these were the Makin remains. So the rifle itself, it's sort of it's a contradiction in a lot of ways, because in some ways it's in just terrible condition, and in some ways it's in amazing condition. So it was recovered in 1999 when they recovered the remains. It went to the Raider Association first, and then the Raider Association gave it to the museum. And so it spent 5.5 years in conservation with the naval with NHHC's underwater archaeology lab, and they removed all of the sort of incrustations and stuff on it. Massive chunks of coral sand and stuff like that. And actually, as they were going through it, they realized there were still 2 live rounds in it, which was
incredible.
Yeah, still pretty cool. I mean, 1 round in the chamber and then 1 left in the magazine. So, I mean, this Marine went down fighting. I get chills every time I say that, because it's just wow. So they did this incredible conservation on the piece. There are some things that are just gone now, like the operate handle is just, it doesn't exist anymore. The trigger guard, we have like 4 fragments of it. But overall, the rifle's basically intact. So the bolt is out of it, or is able to move. The cleaning kit was still in the stock, and it was in pristine condition. Like literally, you could use it. No corrosion, no nothing. The brushes, the pull through thong, and everything are all still there. So we're really going to be doing. We've already got a plan to have it on exhibit fairly quickly. So we're going to be able to display all of that too in the museum, which is really going to be pretty amazing. But yeah, I mean the rifle is probably as close to a holy relic as you could find for the Marine Corps. So it's just it's amazing to be able to tell the story of the 2nd Raider Battalion and those 19 Marines that were unfortunately left on the island. We don't know exactly who carried it, but we can narrow it down, looking at those 19 names to see who was. We're trying to figure out who was carrying what type of weapon, so we could probably narrow it down a little bit more. But really, it's a testament to them and their courage and fighting ability.
And we're coming up on the 80th anniversary of that
Yes.
battle, which is why we're running this article in
Right.
the August issue of Leatherneck. And when you read the article, you'll be able to see some incredible photos that show the way the rifle looked prior to conservation and the way it looks now. It's the conservationists did a brilliant job.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
If you can't wait, there was a sound, a saved round.
Saved round, right?
Yes.
Right.
That's kind of touched on it a little bit about 2 years ago. 3
Oh
years
gosh,
ago.
it was quite a while ago. I saw a photo of the rifle just as it was getting ready to go into conservation, and it really piqued my interest. So I wrote up a saved round about it. And I guess a couple months ago, John and I we were having lunch and talking, and he mentioned one of us talked about Makin and that rifle. I don't remember who brought it up.
we had just gotten it back.
Yeah,
So
and my head started to explode. Like,
Sure.
oh my gosh, I gotta get a look at that rifle. So
the Navy had done when they gave it back to us, I think in February, they had done a video piece on it for their PR purposes, and it was aired publicly and everything, and it really talked about the process more than the history of it, but still it was kind of cool to be a part of it. I came into it late. I got here in 2020. It had already been with them for 4 years, so I'm really just sort of picking up on the tail of it. So there's a whole bunch of other people who really helped shepherd it along the way. But I'm really fortunate to be able to be on the receiving end to get it back here and now get it on exhibit. So that's been just pretty incredible.
Are there any other pieces going into the exhibit with it?
It'll be the rifle, the bullets, the cleaning kit, and everything. So, and actually, we're working on dealing with creating special mounts for it and everything to really be able to show you it in context as much as possible.
Awesome.
So,
Could you tell us a little bit about what your what you're hoping to achieve in the preservation process, what state you want to get the rifle into, and how you're going to prevent further corrosion?
It's been treated for further corrosion, so I mean that's not an issue at this point. It's been professionally conserved to such an extent that it is not going to break down anymore within our lifetimes. It's going to be in the World War II gallery. There is a Makin Island case already, and so we'll be swapping out some artifacts that are types that were carried by the 2nd Raider Battalion on the mission to the rifle that was actually there. So it's really going to be a major upgrade for the exhibit.
That's pretty special.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've got a question for each of you.
Okay.
Tell us what your personal M1 story is. Why are you why do you find that rifle so compelling? I happen to know you each have
Okay.
a story. So this is kind of
go first?
this was, pun intended, a loaded question.
Absolutely.
Oh man, I've been waiting all day for that.
Oh, I'll bet. So, my father owns one. He was not an infantryman. He was in the Air Force. He was a pilot. But he purchased one through the civilian marksmanship program, I don't know, well over 10 years ago. And that specific individual rifle is really what kicked off, in large part, my interest in the mechanics of firearms. He would always make me, when we got back from the range when I was a kid, he would always make me clean the guns, of course, because, what else do you have kids for? And so one of the times when I don't even remember about how old I was. I know I was a teenager, and I had just sort of started to understand a little bit about how a firearm actually functions mechanically. And so when we got back from the range and I was taking it apart, I wanted to do a detail strip and clean all the parts. And in getting down into taking the individual components out, looking at how the, say, the operating rod engages with the bolt, and how the gas system works and stuff like that, that really sparked an interest in me in, like, holy crap, this is an extremely elaborate machine, but still designed to be mass-produced. Every cut, every angle, every machined surface on every single part was done for a reason. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole history behind all this stuff, and a lot of engineering and design that went into it. And it's really just, it's amazing. It's kind of a work of art, a mechanical masterpiece.
Yeah, definitely. It's, it really is an incredible piece of engineering. You're absolutely right. My personal story starts about 1977. Yeah, I'm that old.
We're the only two who were alive in
Exactly.
1977 in this
so
room here.
I was 4 years old,
Okay, I
My
was older.
my grandfather pulled out his footlocker for the first time. My granddad was an infantry officer in World War II, fought in Europe, Army guy. I'm sorry, I'm an Army guy too, but that became my treasure chest growing up. My granddad was my best friend. I was fortunate to have 32 years with him. When I commissioned, I pinned with his second lieutenant's bars. He was fortunately there for it and everything too. But growing up, he'd tell me about his experiences, and of course, once I got into the Army, he really told me about the real experiences. But one of the things he told me early on was, as an officer, you didn't want to look like an officer. So, as an officer, you'd be issued an M1 carbine, and it would make you stand out. So, one of the first things he did upon entering combat was he ditched his carbine and he grabbed an M1. Second thing he did was he grabbed a handful of mud and sanded off the big follow me stripe on the back of his helmet and cleaned off the lieutenant's bar on the front. Tucked his collars in, and he said my men knew who I was. They weren't going to worry about, whether or not I was wearing the proper insignia. And that's one of the things that, that kept him alive. I mean, he basically got through World War II in Europe from Normandy to the end with almost not without a scratch. One minor wound, but
Wow.
yeah, I mean, really, really pretty amazing. In the mid 90s, I'd been collecting stuff for a while already, but in the mid 90s, I got very much into World War II living history and joined a couple of groups, one Air Corps, one infantry, and just really started, immersing myself in that, as well as, starting my museum career. I started working at the Intrepid Museum in New York in 1991, graduated from college in 96, and then, worked at a number of museums through that as well. 1997, I bought my M1, and was a little hole-in-the-wall gun store in Tarrytown, New York, and I found this thing, and it was in great shape. The price was right, and it was an October 1942 rifle. And, it was great. So I brought it home and everything, and I talked to my granddad about it, and he said, "You have it?" Yeah. He said, "Well, how'd you get it? What?" And so I brought it out, and it was like somebody flipped a switch. Suddenly, my 80-something-year-old grandfather was 26 again. And he literally went through the entire manual of arms with the M1, and it was a sight to behold. It was really incredible. And he handed it back to me and said, "Wow, it's been a while." And I was completely blown away. And so, because of him, I've bought and sold a number of guns over the years. That's one that I will never part with. That is just, it will go on to my kids. They understand the historical significance of it, and they're pretty proud of that too. But that connection with him, he and I connect on so many levels, but I had never seen that before, and it was just really, really pretty cool to see.
That story gives me goosebumps. Great story.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably pretty representative of a lot of stories too. So
Sure.
it's good to
Yeah.
hear,
Exactly.
yeah. Just kind of coming back to Sam's point earlier about the engineering a little bit. So the M1, when it was first being designed, was not it was a smaller bullet, right?
Yeah.
So there's some quirks on the gun that have to deal with being rechambered, right?
Yeah. We've talked about this on previous occasions. So, for those of you who have read my article, first of all, thank you.
I read it.
The people listening, but those of you who read my article will know that the Army was initially, and I keep mentioning the Army because, they led the development program. They were working on trying to get people to develop semi-automatic rifles since about the 20s. So the Army was investigating a .276 caliber round to replace the 30-06. 30-06 had been designed, really based on the performance of the French 8mm Lebel, which itself was spec'd out to kill a cavalry horse at 1,000 yards. And after the First World War, many European and the U.S. military as well, many European militaries and the U.S. military realized that it's not much use to have this big, heavy, powerful rifle round if you will very seldom, if ever, have infantrymen using it to its full potential. They realized that a lot of the combat going on was either firing shots of opportunity across the no man's land, or in trench raiding, it would actually be beneficial to have something that kicked less so that you could send more rounds downrange and get more hits. So the Americans started working on the 276 Pedersen round, which was a 7mm. I believe the performance was something like about 140 grain bullet moving at about maybe 2,400, 2,500 feet per second.
Yeah, muzzle velocity was slightly lower than the 30-06, but negligibly.
Yeah, so the ideas here were that if you make the round smaller and it recoils less, then you can design a smaller and lighter rifle to fire it. Soldiers and Marines can fire more rounds more rapidly, and because the ammo weighs less, they can carry more of it, and it costs less to produce. Right. You get these sort of exponential gains from just making small changes. But MacArthur stepped in, General MacArthur himself stepped in at the last minute and said, no, this has to use the standard service ammunition so it's compatible with the machine guns. And so the two rifles that were being trialed at the time, the one developed by John Garand, and yeah, that is how he pronounced his name. I know people say Garand, but he pronounced his name with the emphasis on the first syllable, so I will be doing that as well.
I'm a Garand guy, but hey.
It's not that big a deal.
No, that's not.
Either way.
It's not.
So John Pedersen tried to redesign his rifle for the 30 caliber, and John Garand was successfully able to redesign his rifle in 30 caliber because he'd been working on rifles in 30-06 before. He hadn't started from the ground up in 276. And so you get a few little quirks. Namely, first of all, the magazine capacity was reduced from 10 to 8. People think, oh, why 8 rounds? That seems like such a weird number. Well, it turns out that in that size of internal box magazine, you can fit 10 rounds of 276 or 8 rounds of the larger 30. Also, the operating rod is one of the weak points of the rifle. It has this dog-leg bend in it to fit around the magazine. Same thing. It was originally straight, but they had to bend it to fit around the wider cartridges, and so now that's considered to be kind of a point of failure if you if you fire commercial ammunition that's too powerful, it'll ruin the rifle by bending the operating rod at that exact point.
So you mentioned that in your article that the M1 Garand was informed a lot by a lot of semi-automatic rifles on the civilian market. I know that World War I produced a flurry of just from practical to bizarre of other semi-automatic rifles. Why did they end up going with instead not using a standard magazine, instead of feeding it from the top?
The given reason for using an internal box magazine fed by clips instead of using a detachable magazine was, get this, and I'm not making this up, because the Army was worried that soldiers would be dumb enough to lose all their magazines in the field, and then they wouldn't be able to feed the rifle. So they figured if we go with an internal magazine and you feed it with clips, then that'll be, first of all, it'll be a little cheaper to produce. Which is a big deal because they can get more rifles out of the factory and arm more soldiers and more Marines. But they were also, I'm serious, they were worried that guys in the field would lose their magazines. Now, I know that still happens to some extent.
Yes, it does.
Those of you who are guilty of this know I'm talking to you. But magazines are a lot cheaper to manufacture nowadays, and they're pretty easy to supply, so it's not as big a deal. And the Army later found out that, yeah, even if soldiers are losing their ammunition feeding devices, they're not losing enough of them that it becomes a problem.
Is there any an experimental version of the M1 Garand with a magazine that's floating around there in some archive out there?
Oh yeah. We actually have a couple. Now I did want to also make the point that with the top feeding of the clip down into the Garand, it was already muscle memory. The 03 was fed by stripper clips into the top of the receiver, so it was something that was familiar to soldiers already. So it was a lot easier to do it that way rather than transitioning to a bottom-loaded, locked-in-place magazine. Now, we do have a number of evolutions between the M1 and the M14. There are, during World War II, they're starting to look at how to include a box magazine in it, like a BAR magazine or something like that, to further increase the firepower. So you get the T20 and the T22 and all the way up to what becomes the M14, which is the T44 series. But there's a lot of experimentation going on in the later World War II years up through when the M14 is finally adopted rather in 1957.
So you mentioned you have some of them in your collection.
Yes,
Which was specific?
We have just about a complete run from the T20 up to the T44. I think we're missing one or two pieces, in the Marine Corps collection. So yeah, I mean, the Marines were very, very involved in the development of the follow-on to the M1. So yeah.
So I remember when I was a kid reading all like the Band of Brother books, and then each individual member then wrote their own. Some talked about different ways they would modify their M1 Garand for various purposes. What are some of the ones that y'all have noticed that were most effective?
Let's see. I'm not excuse me. I'm not sure of any field mods really. I mean, it wasn't necessary to really modify it too much in the field.
I do remember reading that some would do something or rather to make it fully automatic.
Yeah, I mean, you could file down the sear and stuff like that, but it's I don't know if that would be an improvement on it or not. I mean, you've got other machine gun guys in the unit. I mean,
it would also
wasting your
because this isn't a firearm designed to fire on fully automatic. It doesn't have an auto sear, so any type of gunsmith level modification made to it would just induce a slam fire, which is a dangerous condition. Don't do that.
I mean, it's not going to be the perceived benefits are definitely not going to outweigh the issues that they would develop.
Yeah, but tell that to an 18-year-old GI.
Oh yeah, of course. Tell anything to an 18-year-old GI. I mean, I was I was a platoon leader in a company XO. You can't really do that much, but
I know people would do some sort of field expedient things, not necessarily to modify the rifle mechanically, but so that they could use it more effectively. Like you'll see photos sometimes, and I think reenactors do this. You'll see photos of people winding their rifle slings around the loaded clips, so that way, kind of like the way a medieval longbowman would hold his arrows in the hand with which he was holding the longbow. You have easier access to the ammunition as opposed to having to reach back and pull the clips out of your bandolier or whatever. So I always thought that was sort of interesting because I don't think that was in any field manuals or part of any official doctrine, but it seems to be a pretty widespread thing.
Yeah, I mean, usually you see shots of clips on GI's web gear and stuff like that too, so you could grab it quickly and then get it right into the rifle rather than having to go into your cartridge belt and pull out a clip.
So we were talking about modifications that may or may not have been done in the field. So if you were making a modification today, if you were going to improve on the M1, what would you do? That's a question for both of you.
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
No,
Okay.
I wouldn't.
Okay.
I mean, there's a reason why George Patton called it the finest battlefield implement ever devised. It's, I mean, yeah, maybe a larger magazine, but that's not something that you could really do in the field. But other than that, I mean, it's an incredible weapon.
It's beautiful to fire. I mean, I'm a considerably smaller person than some of you. I have fired the M1, and I couldn't believe how smooth it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm by no means any type of marksman or rifleman or anywhere close to it. But it was beautiful to fire. It was just beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rifle's just about as big as you are, and you seem to handle it just fine. I mean, I think, well, part of that is because of how heavy it is, but I think that's really a testament to the design. It was designed for people to be able to shoot. That was something, you'll hear some modern shooters say, oh, so what about recoil? Just get stronger. It doesn't matter. Well, no, there is a there. If you design something that's relatively short and compact and easy to shoot and lighter weight than some of its counterparts and with less recoil than some of its counterparts, there's an advantage there. For a shooter of the same skill, a lighter and handier rifle with less recoil will be more effective 10 times out of 10.
Yep.
Well, the guns they use in the Olympics are very lightweight.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, as for improvements, I would have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Bernstein here, and I think there are a number of improvements that could have been made, including some that they would have known about at the time.
Okay.
Namely, shortening the gas system.
Okay.
This is getting good.
Making it, like the M14 rather than.
Yeah, not necessarily introducing a short stroke piston, because I don't think they really had those at the time.
Right.
But definitely, well, the Russians did. But definitely shortening, bringing the gas port closer to the chamber and shortening the operating rod commensurately. So when the M1 was originally designed, it had that gas trap system because the military was afraid that drilling a gas port into the barrel would ruin the accuracy, which was not true. It's another fallacy that the Germans fell into during the war, and they never really got their way out of that. But if the rifle had been designed from the ground up with a gas port drilled into the barrel, they could have made the gas system shorter, which would have increased pressure at the port, improving reliability in harsh conditions. And it would have made the rifle a little bit less front-heavy and a little bit less heavy overall, and I think a little bit easier to manufacture.
Yeah, but it would change the aesthetic of it.
Well, okay, yeah.
Which kind of goes into the fantasy version of Nancy's question, asking like if you could make a change today, you have access to modern materials, modern construction, manufacturing techniques.
M1 2.0.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have a little bit of thought experiment here. Take an M1, shorten the gas system exactly like I said. Turn the action upside down and fully enclose the bolt so that the locking surfaces aren't exposed. Redesign it for a detachable box magazine, and change it to, redesign the rifle to fire a lower power intermediate cartridge.
Oh, you've got an M4.
I would say you've got an AK-47.
Well, okay, yeah. I'm sorry, I should say an M27, but
same gas system as an AK rifle, same locking system, same trigger mechanism. It's lifted pretty much directly from it.
I'm not saying Frankenstein an existing M1 because they're pieces of art, but if you
Don't do
build one from scratch, I would. That's a YouTube channel right there.
I'm sorry, I guess it's my AK bias, or my anti-AK bias seeping in there. But
Kalashnikov did have the ability to take apart M1 rifles, and he was actually given M1 carbines as well to take apart, and he incorrectly thought they were designed by the same person because the controls are so similar.
Yeah, they
are. But it's obvious if you take apart an AK and an M1 right next to each other,
sure.
you can see a lot of inspiration there.
Sure. Actually, you need to come over and see our Winchester automatic rifle, which is basically just a scaled-up carbine.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's incredible seeing the similarities there. And obviously, they're both designed by the same team. But yeah, that's pretty cool.
So, going over to your inventory at the Marine Corps Museum, what are some of the the white whales you have floating around?
Well, we have a T3E2, serial number 89, which is one of the test rifles that became the M1, and it is .276 caliber, and that's really one of the most fascinating pieces as far as rifles go that I prefer. I'd say there.
Did we run that picture in the magazine?
Yes, we did.
Yeah,
yes.
that's right. That's right.
So
That's what I
we
thought.
did that. We did the T1 Pedersen as well, which obviously we have serial number 13, and we did one more. We did the Johnson, which again is one of my my personal favorites. The Johnson rifle is actually the first semi-automatic rifle that the Marines took into combat, because on August 7th, when 1st Marine Division was going into Guadalcanal, the 1st Parachute Battalion was carrying 23 Johnson rifles. And of those 23 that have been identified by serial number, we actually have 2 of them in the collection. Yes. We have one that has been on display for a while now, and then we just had one donated within the past year that was with the 1st Parachute Battalion on Guadalcanal and then was carried by Colonel John Lanigan, who was CO of the 25th Marines on on Iwo Jima, and he was carrying it when he earned his Navy Cross.
What is your acquisitions process? Like, I know you said donations, but do you have, like, are you looking for pieces of your collection that are missing?
We're always interested in hearing about stuff that's out there that tells a good Marine Corps story. For example, we just had, and in fact, we have a donation that's in the process right now of that was brought in by the son of Colonel Ed Lefebvre, who was a 3-war Marine. He flew combat in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and his son just donated his 45 among other stuff as well. It's a massive collection. It's fantastic. Fantastic. And as an aviation guy, I'm totally geeking out over this.
That's really cool.
Donation. I mean, it's amazing stuff. But yeah, I mean, really, the focus is, we have plenty of rifles in the collection. It's those rifles that can, or those firearms that can help us tell a better Marine Corps story in the museum. That's what we really want. I can put a dozen M1s out there. If we don't know who carried them, so what? We need to know who carried it. What did they do with it? That's really how people relate to artifacts. And so, that's really what we're seeking out more than anything.
If you put an M1 on display, just because it's an M1, then it's one of 5.5 million.
Right.
If you put an M1 on display that was carried by that specific person at that specific battle, it's one of 1.
Right. Exactly.
All right. So we've talked about how the M1 kind of came to be. We talked about it through the war, and it wasn't changed too much, right? There were a few little modifications.
They changed the gas system to the what we're used to today from the gas trap to the gas port,
right?
And that was very early on. And in, I believe, 1944 or 45, the rear sight was simplified, and that is it. That's completely the extent of it.
And so then let's kind of skip forward about a decade, I guess, when we're starting to wind it down or replace the
Sure. They actually restarted the production line in the early 50s during the Korean War with and Harrington and Richardson and I think it's IHC. It's International Harvester. That's it. Yeah, wow. So those two were brought in to manufacture additional rifles during the Korean War. So yeah, I mean, it was put back into production because it was needed, but that at that point, there were a couple more modifications done. The trigger guard went from a milled trigger guard to a stamped trigger guard. They also added the newer gas plug. I think that was actually done during World War II with the plus rather than the single slot on the gas port.
It might have been, but my father's rifle is one of those late production ones, so I'm only familiar with physically manipulating that one with all the changes.
Got it. Yeah, I mean actually the rifle that I have, I've corrected 2 parts on it, and other than the barrel, which is a 1956 barrel, it is all original October 42. So,
and then we kind of get to the point where it's time to start retiring the M1.
Right.
What are some of the reasons we're looking at, like the M14 or?
Well, I mean, the M14 was sort of the logical follow-on to the M1. They wanted something that was select fire, so it could be fired both fully and semi-automatic. They wanted something with a box magazine, and the M1's receiver was adaptable to that. They sort of went through this evolution starting during World War II to see how they can improve it and make it more of a modern battle rifle. What they came up with was really, a very good rifle. It shortened the gas system. It went to the box magazine and, added the select fire, and they went to the 308 rather than the 30-06, but, basically the same, roughly similar ballistics on the round. It's just, shorter cartridge. And really was a good follow on to it. And then with the introduction of the M16 in the Army, just a couple years later, the M14 sort of got phased out pretty quickly, but it's never been fully replaced. There's still versions of the M14 in service today.
And that one has been updated with modern materials.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Stuff, yeah.
Looking at DMRs and EMRs and stuff like that. I mean, it's just really pretty impressive what you can still do with an M14.
And even M1s themselves are still used pretty widely as drill rifles.
Yes, they are.
They made so many of the things.
See, I always think of the M14 as the drill rifle, but I guess there's M1s out there.
A lot of M1s out there still.
Yeah. So
Nick, have you fired the M1?
I have fired an M1.
Thoughts?
It's like you said, it's smooth. It feels nice. I fired it right after I fired the 1903, and it doesn't hurt you as much. So.
No.
The hype is real. If you're listening to this and you haven't fired an M1 and you have access or will at some point have access to one, you need to do it. That's one of the essential experiences.
It truly is.
Or if you're not a particular gun nut and don't know the channels, how would you go about trying to maybe source one? It's probably not as easy as it was in the 90s.
The civilian marksmanship program is really, the way to do it. They're still affordable there, but you have to be either a veteran or go through the M1 training class and everything that the CMP does from time to time. I actually went through the CMP M1 class back in 1997, I think, and learned a heck of a lot about the rifle and everything. And of course, we shot competition and everything there too, which was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, CMP is really the way to go because you can still get them fairly affordably.
What is a fair price for M1 these days in the market? A fair price.
So I paid $400 for mine in 1997. I have been offered $1,200 for it and turned it down. So they're very, they're up there, especially for really good condition rifles.
Yeah, I mean the milcert market. Every time there's a World War II movie, it bumps up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if this is still true, but for a while there, you could get a field grade example for something like $650.
Yeah, that's about what the CMP is charging now.
Oh, they haven't all dried up yet?
No, they haven't. So.
Uh-oh. You got a birthday coming up.
There you go.
Well, I know I had to save up for something. It was either going to be an MR556A1 or, an M1 would be substantially less expensive than that. So that gives me some dangerous ideas. And I can actually find ammo for it, unlike my Type 99.
Yep.
All right. Well, there is, not to be too abrupt with this transition here, but there is a lot of aviation interest in this room. I want to make sure we got John in the room here.
Sure.
You're talking about aviation ordnance. So what ordnance are we particularly?
We've got 2 pilots in the room for the
this
first
is
time ever.
True.
Yeah.
Actually, I've been we've been out. Let me not get into that. I've been looking into aviation ordnance recently. My main interest, as both an aviator and as an aviation historian, has been close air support. So right now, I'm looking at the evolution of aircraft rockets and how they sort of came about in World War II, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there about them and how they were used and what types were used and everything. So that's been fascinating to get into. There are a lot of sort of assumptions that they were just used widespread, and really they didn't get into service until mid '44. In any real major strength. I mean, the first combat use was 11 January of '44, and they developed a number of different types, both the Army and the Navy. Looking at the Army's program, it was an absolute disaster, and they basically switched over to the Navy type, which was pretty cool and far more effective. So that's just been really interesting to get into all the primary source documents on that. I'm not sure exactly what I'm gonna write with this, but it's definitely going to be something that very few people have seen before.
Yeah, I recall a story. Now it was British. I think it was Spitfires loaded up with rockets.
Probably Typhoons.
Typhoons, yeah,
Yes.
Probably Typhoons. Yeah, I'm gonna get the details wrong. It's been a couple years, but where they actually were only loaded up with rockets, and they went on an attack run into, I believe it was just Germany.
Okay.
I think they were already pushed far enough over to shoot there, and they unloaded every rocket they had from 14 planes or 18 planes, and then not one of them hit the target.
There were a lot of issues with accuracy. Especially, the British rockets were better than ours in some ways, and not as good in others. Their rocket motors, especially the 3.5-inch or the 3-inch motors that they had, were better than the 3.5-inch motors that we had. That being said, both their RP-3 rockets and our Mark 7 rockets were nose heavy. So you really needed to figure out the ballistics on it before you pull that trigger, because they tended to fall short. But yeah, I mean, there were a lot of accuracy issues with them.
And so it feels like they were not a whole lot better than dropping a few 250-pound bombs or 120. Was 150-pound bombs the smaller one? For a while.
What you have to realize, first of all, is a rocket is an area weapon system. It's not a precision weapon. Second of all, one rocket is the equivalent of, for an American rocket, would be the equivalent of a 5-inch anti-aircraft shell or a 5-inch artillery shell. So one P-47 or one Corsair could basically put down a battery's worth of artillery on an area. That's devastating firepower, and it really, was a game changer. It didn't necessarily have to be, pinpoint target on a tank, but if you could saturate that entire area, you'd kill all the supporting infantry, and then that tank is, toast. So they were effective for area suppression. They were effective for, killing a flak crew around a gun. They didn't necessarily need to hit the gun directly to be effective. So, and one of the things I've been getting into is they started using proximity fuses on them too. So now you got a little radar in the nose of that rocket that can sense when it's near a target, and it will detonate in the air rather than on impact, which made them a lot more lethal.
What's the time window you're looking at here?
I'm really looking 1942 to about 1953.
1953. So that's right before they start getting on the helicopters, I guess?
We started experimenting, the Army started experimenting with rockets on helicopters really by about 1955-56 with the House Board. And they started doing all sorts of different configurations on all sorts of different helicopters. But really it wasn't until 62 where we started seeing armed helicopters, supporting ground forces or ARVN forces in Vietnam. And then, of course, we took off from there.
Okay. And then, so as you're looking at the rockets then, was it kind of just a modification to do on any kind of heavy fighter or attack fighter? Or
it was initially one of the first systems the Army developed was called fired the M8 rocket, and it was a triple launch tube that was hung under the wing. They were fairly capable, and again, they adopted the 4.5-inch artillery rocket to an aircraft use. But those clusters of tubes hanging under each wing caused a lot of drag. Reduced the maneuverability of the airplane, and everything wasn't really great. And the Army really poured a lot of resources into that program. The Navy and the Marine Corps started off with the 3.5-inch rocket mounted on rails. That was faster, was more accurate, and they realized very quickly they didn't need the rail system. And they came up with what they called zero-length launchers, which basically were aerodynamic stubs mounted under the wings that a little button on the rocket just locked into both at the front and the back of the rocket. And when it ignited, it was off, and it didn't need that whole launch rail to keep it accurate and keep it true, because it tended to weather vane into the airstream. So it would be as long as you kept the aircraft in trim, it would fly straight. And so that really was the big development that the Navy and the Marine Corps came up with, that everybody else developed after that, or adopted after that.
Okay. What were they using? Because they didn't have computer chips, right? What were they using to actually set the rockets off?
It was electrically fired.
It was electrically
Yeah,
fired?
I mean, and with rockets even today, I mean, anybody who's worked around aircraft rockets knows static electricity is a killer, quite literally. You do your straight current checks and everything when you're rearming current aircraft, and It's really something you need to be incredibly aware of. Don't rub your feet on the floor before you start touching rockets and stuff. But yeah, I mean, just little bit of excess current can really ruin your day.
Yeah, because that's what was actually going through my mind as you were explaining. The shorter tubes, as they're kind of exposed to the air,
Right.
which generates, from what I understand, generates electric fields.
Yeah, I mean, there is some friction generated, but really, it's you've got your ignition wire that comes from the aircraft to the rocket, and that's what will launch it.
I don't know a whole lot about rockets in World War II, so
Yeah, I mean, they're fascinating
always
stuff.
happy to learn. So how do you actually learn about the rockets? Do you have the documentation? Like, there's not a lot of those rockets laying around, are there? Like,
Right now, we have a 3.5 inch and we have a 5 inch HVAR, which is the high velocity aircraft rocket. Where the HVAR was the last type that we developed during World War II and was the most accurate, fastest, and probably hardest hitting as well. And that's what we used through the Korean War as well. As far as documentation, we had some in the office. Actually, we have a fairly extensive manual collection and everything, so been able to get into that. Been pulling unit histories. Have the unit history of Aviation Ordnance Development Unit 1, which was the Navy unit that worked with Caltech to develop the first rockets, and that has been fascinating to get into. Also, this week I'm actually going to go talk to Jack Elliott, who was who was right in the middle of all of that. So yeah, he and I are going to sit down on Thursday and we'll talk rockets and everything, because one of the manuals that I've been going through was his manual from March of 1944. So that's pretty spectacular.
Get him to sign the book.
Yeah. So.
Anybody got any?
So, for our listeners who want to educate themselves more on either M1 rifle or weapons in general, what resources would you recommend?
Wow. Actually, one of the really cool resources that I've used a lot is fold3.com. If you want to look into the unit histories, whether it's ground-based Marines, aviation Marines, or anything, they have massive amounts of primary source documentation there online. I mean, yeah, it's a paid subscription, but still, it's well worth it. I've been pulling up, individual squadron histories. So, like with the first Marine combat use of rockets was VMTB 134 in February of 1944, and they had all of that right there online. So, really a phenomenal source.
Awesome. So we have first article in the M1 came out in April. We have your article on the Makin M1 come out in August. Is there any other works or anything you'd like to plug for your future? Or
just come to the museum. We're doing new stuff all the time. Obviously, final phase is well in the works, so we'll be opening those galleries probably in 2024 at some point. But really, lots of new stuff, lots of updates, and just come see the museum.
Awesome.
I would say pretty much a similar thing. Read Leatherneck magazine. If you're listening to this, you're probably already reading Leatherneck, in which case, good on you. If you're not, I don't know why you're not, because it's pretty much the same stuff as you'll hear on the podcast, just in print form. I believe it was R. Lee Ermey himself who said that when he wants to know what's going on in the Marine Corps, he reads Leatherneck magazine.
That's right.
So will you really...
He told us that.
Are you really about to contradict the Gunny himself, God rest his soul?
Yeah, rest in peace.
Yeah.
So, Sam, to answer the previous question that William asked, where do you go, or where would you suggest readers go, or listeners go when they want to learn more?
Well, I would suggest, as I said, listeners read the magazine for an overview. But if you really want to do in-depth historical research, to give a little bit of a behind the curtain as to what I do. Now, I'm not a properly degreed and trained historian, so I might be going about this completely wrong, but I really like primary sources. I always hit the primary sources.
You're doing it right.
Now, it's sure watching Forgotten Weapons or whatever is fun and all, but the stuff like that, pop history, is only your first step. It should just tell you what types of things you need to investigate, and then you have to hit hard those primary sources. Testing documentation, field manuals, reports by people who actually worked on various programs, if you can find memoirs by people who were influential in various weapons development programs, like Hatcher's Book of the Garand is great. It's by General Julian Hatcher, who was in Army Ordnance, probably the only sane person in Army Ordnance. Or if you're just stuff like that, hit the primary sources. There's no substitute for those.
As the professionally trained historian in the room, that's the very right answer. So I have to give two claps for you on that one.
Thank you.
When I have a question about weapons, I go to, well, either Sam, you, or you, John. So
Well-
I have the advantage there. I don't quite have to read the primary sources. I just hit the two of you up. Like,
Well,
hey.
the reason you come to us is because we either
That's right.
have
We're in
read
the
those
primary
sources
sources.
or we
That's
have
right.
access to them.
It's my it's like Cliff's Notes. I just go to the two of you and you answer the questions.
We're
for
just
me.
search engines.
I've always tried to focus on the primary sources and everything, and going through personal paper collections and just unit histories and everything like that to try to I've always called it putting the puzzle together. But I will also say that there is a reason there are secondary sources out there too, and as a historian, I guess I tend to overlook them at times, and it's something that there are a lot of good sources out there. There's good stuff on firearms. So yeah, pick up a book. Really, it doesn't matter what it is, but start somewhere. Start reading. That's how I got started with airplanes. I have my first airplane book from way back in the 70s. But it's how to ignite a passion.
Well, and actually, interesting that you would say that. Sam and I were just talking last night about how at age 8, 9, he would come up here to this office with me when I was a copy editor at the time for Leatherneck, and he'd get dragged along.
I would pour through these Jane's recognition guides.
Yes.
She couldn't
Absolutely.
very well leave a young child at. She probably could have, but she would drag me along to the office during the
No,
summer
you
when I
can't
was
do
out of
that.
school,
Uh-huh.
and I would leaf through these Jane's recognition guides, and they're pretty much just dry specs and a more or less correct paragraph synopsis about whatever vehicle or weapon system it is.
Mm-hmm.
But just as Mr. Bernstein said, if you want to learn about something, just read as much as you can about it. And this next point gets a little bit into historiography and sort of the ethical issues there. But always, of course, cross-check your sources with each other.
Yes.
Because with a primary source, you're just getting dry information in isolation. So when you hit a secondary source, you're getting, first of all, someone who ideally knows what he or she is talking about and amalgamates all those different resources together to build a more complete picture. But you also get that writer's personal biases in.
Absolutely.
So
What do you mean you're not a degreed historian? You're sounding like you are.
I'm not a great student.
All right. Well,
Yeah, oh,
you're,
God.
you're on
Oh,
the right
God.
track there, man.
And just to go back to what William asked earlier, Sam, what are you working on for Leatherneck? I know already, but tell everybody what you're working on for Leatherneck.
Well, I'm about to have a write-up on Modern Day Marine 2022 go to press. That took place in May. It's a great expo. Go next time. If you're listening to this, I would strongly encourage you to visit. And I believe that's going to press in August, right?
That is also in the That's right. You guys are
Yeah,
side
cool.
by side in
Yeah,
the August
double
issue.
feature.
That's right.
There you
That's
go.
right.
So make sure you're receiving Leatherneck magazine. And then the next installment of This Is My Rifle will be on the M27 IAR. And this is probably the most complex research project I have ever undertaken. It's kind of a bear, I'm not going to lie. But when that gets done, look for that in the magazine. That's sure to be pretty interesting. I'll be speaking with people who have actually worked on that program. And that's kind of one of the great things about writing about something so modern is that even though, it's more difficult because it's still going on, you have much better access to the people who are actually doing that, and you can ask them the obscure questions that you won't necessarily get from a memoir from someone who died 50 years ago.
True.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I think you've said it all. I think it sounds like a good place to wrap it up before we start getting into the ins and outs of historiography and
Sure.
talking about anything too much newer than the Korean War.
We'd love to have you both back.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Thank you, and thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, guys, for having us.
All right. So, John, they can find you at the museum.
Yep.
We'll put some links from some of the stuff we talked about in the show notes.
Cool.
Sam, your content can be found on Leatherneck.
Yeah.
And if they want to buy a gun from you and you're in Stafford, he works at a gun shop in Stafford on 610.
Yeah. You know the one.
You know the one. It's the one that's there.
Yep.
So just a quick disclaimer. This is we're all just people. And we're expressing opinions. These opinions are our own. They don't represent the Marine Corps Association, Leatherneck Magazine, or the museum.
Or the Marine Corps.
Or the Marine Corps. So take everything we say as opinion. They're just that. And with all that, we will catch you guys on the flip and catch you later.
This episode of Scuttlebutt is sponsored by Service Credit Union. Our friends at Service Credit Union have been serving military, veterans, and their families for over 65 years. You might know that they provide mortgages, including VA loans as well as auto and personal loans. But did you know that they now have a loan specifically for the iBot mobility device? For those who don't know, the iBot is a revolutionary device that goes above and beyond what a traditional mobility device can do. It can go up curbs, navigate stairs and snow, and even rise up to 6 feet. Of course, this device also comes with a high cost that isn't usually covered by insurance. So Service Credit Union has stepped in to help provide its members with financing, with no money down and terms up to 72 months. For more details, visit servicecu.org/ibot.